Have you ever handed someone a piece of your soul and watched them set it down on a table like it was a used napkin? Because that's what happened to me on a Saturday night in October in a private dining room at the Brookline Country Club, while a woman in a champagne-colored Chanel suit looked at the gift I'd spent 11 months making and laughed. I'm going to tell you exactly what she said. I'm going to tell you what my son did. And I'm going to tell you what I did the next morning at 9:15, when I walked into my attorney's office on State Street and watched his face go the color of old paper. But first, you have to understand the gift. My name doesn't matter for this. Call me what my granddaughter used to call me before any of this happened. Call me Mim. I'm 68 years old. I've been a widow for 14 years. My husband Hollis died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in our kitchen, 3 weeks before our 28th anniversary. And the last thing he ever said to me was, "Mim, you forgot to put cinnamon in the oatmeal." I have not eaten oatmeal since. We had one son. His name is Beckett. He was 34 years old at the time of the dinner. He's a corporate lawyer at one of those firms in Boston where everyone wears the same shoes. He's tall and he's smart, and he was, for 33 years, the kindest boy I have ever known. The gift was a quilt. Not just any quilt. Hollis kept everything. Every shirt he ever loved. Every pair of his father's work pants. The little blue dress I wore home from the hospital with Beckett. The flannel my father-in-law wore on the boat the summer before he passed. Hollis kept them in a cedar chest in our attic, and after he died, I couldn't bear to look at them for 10 years. Then one January, I went up there and I opened the chest, and I sat on the attic floor for 4 hours just holding his old fishing shirt to my face. I started the quilt that February. I worked on it for 11 months. I cut squares from Hollis's wedding shirt and his father's work pants, and Beckett's first Little League jersey, and my mother's apron. I sewed the corners of his baby blanket into the border. In the very center, I embroidered the date Beckett was born, and underneath it, in Hollis's actual handwriting that I traced from a birthday card he'd written me in 1994, the words, "Our boy, 11 months." By hand. I have arthritis in my right thumb now, and I think it's permanent. I don't care. I wrapped it in tissue paper and put it in a long flat box from a stationery store. I wrote Beckett's name on the top in silver pen. I drove myself to Boston that Saturday and checked into a hotel 2 blocks from the club because I didn't want to drive home tired. The engagement was to a woman named Tatum Hadley Rainsford. She was 29, an associate at a different firm, and her family lived in Weston in a house with its own name. The house was called Ashlawn. People who name their houses are a particular breed, and I had clocked it from the first dinner. Tatum's mother was Corinne Hadley Rainsford. Her father was Whitfield Hadley Rainsford, but everyone called him Whit. He didn't speak much. She spoke for both of them. I'd met Corinne 3 times before that night. Each time I came away feeling like I'd just been examined by a dermatologist. She would look at my purse. She would look at my shoes. She would ask me where I summered, and when I said I didn't summer anywhere, I lived in my house year-round, she had laughed like I'd told a joke. I didn't dislike Tatum. I want that on the record. Tatum was sharp and a little nervous, and she laughed at her own jokes before she finished them. I thought, this girl is trying. I thought, her mother is a piece of work. But she is not her mother. I was wrong about that, but only by a little. Tatum was something worse. She was a person who knew exactly what her mother was and had decided long ago that the easiest path through life was to agree with her. The engagement dinner was supposed to be small. Just family. 22 people, which is what very rich people mean when they say small. There was a man with white gloves at the door. There were 3 different forks at every place setting. There was a string trio playing in the corner, 2 violins and a cello, and they were playing Vivaldi, and not one person was listening. I sat between a great-aunt of Tatum's who told me 4 times that she had been a debutante in 1962, and a cousin of Whit's who spent the entire appetizer course explaining offshore something or other. I smiled. I nodded. I had brought the gift in its box and tucked it under my chair. I had planned to give it to Beckett at the very end of dinner, quietly, just the two of us, so it wouldn't feel performative. That was always my plan. I am not a woman who needs an audience. But before dessert, Corinne stood up and tapped her wineglass with a silver knife and said she had a surprise for the happy couple. And she had her assistant. She had brought her assistant to a family dinner, wheel out a small mahogany cart with a velvet box on it, and inside the velvet box was a set of estate jewelry that had apparently belonged to her grandmother, and Tatum cried, and Beckett looked properly impressed, and Corinne looked around the room and said, "Now, I know we said no large gifts, but a mother only has one chance to mark her daughter's engagement. Beckett, dear, has your mother brought anything? I'd hate for her to feel left out." That word, brought. Like I was a guest at a potluck. The whole room turned and looked at me. The cousin who'd been explaining offshore something stopped explaining. The trio kept playing Vivaldi. My ears started doing that ringing thing they do. I could have said no. I could have said I'd give my gift to Beckett in private. I should have. But I'm 68 years old, and I have spent enough of my life sitting quietly while women like Corinne Hadley Rainsford made me feel small, and I thought, my boy deserves to have his mother participate in his engagement dinner. So I reached under my chair and I got the box. I walked it to where Beckett was sitting next to Tatum, and I set it in front of him, and I kissed the top of his head the way I used to when he came home from school. I said, "This is from your father and me. He helped me make it, in a way." Beckett opened it. He pulled back the tissue paper. He saw the quilt. I watched his face, and I want to be honest about what I saw, because for a moment, a single half-second, his eyes filled up. He recognized it. He recognized his father's wedding shirt. He recognized his grandfather's work pants. He saw our boy in his father's handwriting, and his face did the thing a face does right before a person cries. And then he looked up at Tatum, and he looked across at Corinne, and his face closed. Corinne leaned over. She picked up one corner of the quilt with 2 fingers, the way you pick up a sock that's been on the floor too long. She turned to the table. "Oh," she said. "Oh, how darling. Look at this, everyone. It's a little patchwork blanket. How charming." She set it down. She turned to me. "Did you make this yourself, dear? With your own hands?" I said I did. "Well, isn't that something? A homemade blanket from the mother of the groom. Tatum, sweetheart, we'll find a lovely place for it. Perhaps the dog can use it in the mudroom. I want you to understand. I want you to really understand." She didn't whisper this. She said it at full volume in a room of 22 people, while a string trio played Vivaldi, and my son sat next to her daughter and did not move. Someone laughed. I don't know who. It might have been the offshore cousin. It might have been Tatum. The great aunt who'd been a debutante in 1962 made a little throat-clearing sound that I think she meant to be sympathetic. I looked at my son. He was looking at his plate. He was looking at his salad fork. He was 34 years old, and he was looking at the salad fork that his future mother-in-law had selected because she had selected everything, and he did not say one single word. I waited. I waited 8 seconds. I counted. 8 is a long time in a silent room. Then I picked up the quilt. I folded it slowly, the way I'd folded it that morning. Corners first, then in half again. I put it back in the box. I put the lid back on. I tucked the box under my arm. I said, "Beckett, congratulations on your engagement. Tatum, I wish you every happiness." I said it without any sharpness. I said it the way you say goodbye to a neighbor moving away, and then I walked out. I walked through the dining room and down the hallway with the oil paintings of dead men in waistcoats, and I got my coat from the coat check, and I walked out the front door of the Brookline Country Club, and I drove back to my hotel. And I lay on the hotel bed in my dress and my pearls, and I cried for 40 minutes. Then I stopped crying. I washed my face. I called the front desk and asked them to recommend a place that did a good breakfast. The woman at the desk said the diner around the corner did blueberry pancakes the way her mother used to make them. And I said, "Thank you. That sounds wonderful. I'll see you at 7. I slept 4 hours. I woke up at 5:30. I sat at the little desk by the window and I made a list on hotel stationery. The list had 3 items. The first item was the name of my attorney. His name is Hollis Marbury. Yes, the same first name as my late husband. They went to law school together. Hollis was the best man at our wedding. He has handled my affairs for 41 years. The second item said, Revocable Trust Amendment. The third item said, 1788 Beacon. At 7, I ate blueberry pancakes. The woman at the front desk was right. They were excellent. At 8:30, I checked out. At 9:15, I walked into Hollis Marbury's office on State Street, and his assistant Marguerite looked up and said, "Mim, you don't have an appointment." And I said, "Marguerite, please tell Hollis I'm here. And please cancel whatever he was doing this morning." And she looked at my face and she didn't ask any more questions. And 3 minutes later, Hollis came out and he saw me and he said, "Oh no, who died?" I said, "Nobody died. I need to change the trust." He took me back to his office. He closed the door. He sat me down. He poured me a glass of water from a pitcher. He sat across from me and he put his hands flat on the desk and he said, "Tell me." I told him. The whole thing. The quilt, the dog blanket comment, the 8 seconds, the walkout. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Mim, are you absolutely sure about this? Because what you're describing is not a small thing." And I said, "Hollis, you have been my lawyer for 41 years. You know what I have. You know how I got it. You know what Hollis and I built together and what I built after he was gone. Tell me, honestly, is what I'm about to do unreasonable?" He looked at me. He took a long breath. He said, "No, it is not unreasonable. It is, in fact, exactly what I would advise you to do if you were any other client. But Beckett is your son, so I am asking you again, are you absolutely sure?" And I said, "Yes." Now, here is the part that requires a little history. I worked as a chef. Beckett knew this. Everyone knew this. I started in a kitchen in Cambridge when I was 19 years old, peeling potatoes for $2 an hour. And by the time I was 30, I was the executive chef at a restaurant in the South End that had a 6-week waiting list. Hollis and I met when he came in for dinner with a client and tipped me $100 and a note that said, "Marry me." We were married 14 months later. When we married, I quit the restaurant. Hollis didn't ask me to. I quit because we wanted a baby and because I was tired and because I had been thinking for about a year about something else. I had been thinking about real estate. Boston in the late 1980s was a strange place. There were neighborhoods that nobody wanted that I knew, from walking home from my restaurant at midnight, were going to be wanted very much in 15 years. The South End, parts of Jamaica Plain, certain blocks in Dorchester. Eastie. I knew it because I knew where young people with no money were starting to eat, where the cheap, interesting restaurants were opening, where the artists were renting studios because rent was $40 a month. I bought my first building in 1989. It was a 4-unit on a street nobody wanted, and it cost me $62,000, and I put it in my name only. Hollis told me he thought I was crazy, and then he told me he trusted me, and then he handed me the down payment from our savings, and he said, "If you make money on this, I want a steak dinner." I made money on that. I made money on the next one. By the time Beckett was born in 1991, I owned 4 buildings. By the time Hollis died in 2012, I owned 31 buildings, a small commercial portfolio, and a piece of a hotel in the Berkshires. I never told Beckett the numbers. I want to be clear about that. I never lied to him. He knew I owned some buildings. He knew I did all right. He grew up in a perfectly nice 3-bedroom in Newton. He went to public school. He had a part-time job at the Stop and Shop in high school because I made him. And he took out student loans for half of law school because I told him a man should pay for some of his own education or he'll never respect it. I did this on purpose. Hollis and I talked about it before he died. We had seen what money does to boys when their fathers hand them too much of it. We had decided together that Beckett would inherit one day, but not until he was 35, and not until I was satisfied he understood what it cost to build. He turned 35 in February, 4 months after the engagement dinner. So here's the thing Corinne Hadley Ransford did not know when she picked up my quilt with 2 fingers and offered it to the dog in her mudroom. She did not know that the woman she was insulting owned the building her own daughter's law firm leased its 10th and 11th floors in. She did not know that the woman she was calling a homemaker had, 6 months earlier, declined an offer of $41 million for a single Back Bay property. She did not know that the trust she was so eager to have her daughter married into was, in fact, mine. Entirely. Not Beckett's. Not yet. And she did not know about 1788 Beacon. 1788 Beacon Street is a building I bought in 1997. It was a wreck. It had been a private mansion in the 1880s, then a boarding house, then a flop house, then empty for 16 years. I bought it for $240,000 because the roof had partially fallen in, and the city was about to seize it. I spent 4 years restoring it. I learned how to read historical preservation guidelines. I sat through 9 zoning meetings. I cried twice. I won 3 appeals. By 2002, 1788 Beacon was a 14-unit luxury residential building with a private garden in the back and a marble entryway, and the cheapest unit in it now rents for $9,000 a month. It is, today, worth somewhere between $38 and $43 million. Corinne Hadley Ransford lived 3 blocks away. She walked past it every morning on her way to her Pilates class. She had told me at one of our earlier dinners, in a voice meant to inform me about real estate I obviously knew nothing about, that 1788 Beacon was the most desirable address in the city, of course, but completely impossible to get into. They don't even keep a wait list. I had smiled. I had eaten my fish. So when I sat in Hollis Marbury's office that Sunday morning, here is what I told him. I said, take Beckett out of the trust entirely, not reduced, not delayed, out. I said, the assets are mine. They will remain mine for as long as I am alive. Upon my death, the entire portfolio will pass into a charitable foundation, which I want you to draft the bylaws for this week. The foundation will be called the Hollis Marbury Foundation. No, I said, when he started to object. Named for my husband. You happen to share his name. It is a coincidence I am pleased about. I said, the foundation will exist for one purpose. To purchase and operate transitional housing for working women who have left abusive marriages and need a year of stable shelter to find their feet. Not a shelter. Housing. Real apartments. With real keys. I said, the first property the foundation will use for this purpose is 1788 Beacon Street. Hollis Marbury looked at me. He said, Mim, 1788 Beacon is worth $40 million. I said, I know what it's worth. He said, you're going to take a $40 million luxury building in the best block of the Back Bay, and you are going to turn it into housing for women in crisis. I said, yes. He said, do you understand what that will do to property values on that block? I said, yes. He said, do you understand who lives on that block? I said, yes, Hollis. I understand exactly who lives on that block. He sat back in his chair. He took off his glasses. He cleaned them with the little cloth he keeps in his desk drawer. He put them back on. He looked at me. He said, Mim, I have to ask, is this revenge? I thought about it. I really did. I sat in his office and I thought about it for a long minute. I said, Hollis, some of it is revenge. I won't lie to you. But most of it is something else. Most of it is that I have spent 36 years making money in this city, and I have not spent it on anything that mattered. I have a son who, last night, sat next to his fiancée while her mother insulted the only thing I have ever made him with my own 2 hands, and he did not open his mouth. I am 68 years old. I do not have forever. I am going to spend the rest of my time and most of my money on women who would have spoken up, including for me. Hollis nodded. He picked up his pen. He said, "I'll have a draft Tuesday." I drove home that afternoon. I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich and I ate it on my back porch and I watched the leaves come down. I did not cry. I did not feel triumphant. I felt for the first time in a long time awake. Beckett called me on Tuesday afternoon. He said, "Mom, about Saturday." I said, "Yes." He said Tatum wanted to apologize. Her mother had been drinking. She didn't mean what she said about the dog blanket. She really didn't. I said, "Beckett." He said, "What?" I said she used both hands to lift it like it was contaminated. She didn't slur a single word. Your fiancé laughed. You stared at your salad fork for 8 seconds. I counted. There was a long pause. He said, "I froze, Mom. I didn't know what to do." I said, "I know, sweetheart. That's the problem." "That's exactly the problem." He said, "Can we have dinner? Just us, so I can apologize properly." I said, "Yes, not this week. Next week. I'll let you know when." I didn't see him for 9 days. In those 9 days, Hollis Marbury filed the trust amendment. The foundation paperwork went through. 1788 Beacon Street's 23 current tenants who paid an average of $14,000 a month received polite letters informing them their leases would not be renewed. They had 90 days. The building would, after a 6-month renovation, become transitional housing operated by the Hollis Marbury Foundation. Press release to follow. The press release went out on a Thursday. The Boston Globe ran a small piece on Friday. Real estate site picked it up Saturday. By Sunday, it was on the front page of the city section because it turned out a $40 million Back Bay address being converted into housing for abuse survivors was, in fact, a story. Corinne Hadley Rainsford lived 3 blocks away. So did her closest friends. So did the women on her co-op board. So did the people who came to her Christmas party. Beckett called me on Sunday night. He said, "Mom." I said, "Yes." He said, "I just saw the Globe." I said, "M." He said, "Mom." He said, "Mom, did you do this?" I said, "Beckett, have dinner with me Wednesday. Just us. 6 o'clock. The diner on Center Street. The one we used to go to." He came. He was 12 minutes early. He was sitting in the booth when I walked in. He stood up when I came over, and he hugged me the way he hadn't hugged me in 3 years. Hard, with his face in my shoulder, the way he hugged me at his father's funeral. We ordered. He had the meatloaf. I had the turkey club. The waitress brought us coffee in thick white mugs, and Beckett wrapped both his hands around his, and he looked at me. He said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the buildings. All of them. I told him the numbers. I told him about 1788 Beacon and what I'd done and why. I told him about the trust amendment. I told him he was no longer in it. I told him that if I lived another 20 years he would receive upon my death exactly nothing. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He sat very still and he listened. And when I finished, he said, "Mom, I had no idea." I said, "I know. I wanted it that way." He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I wanted you to become a man who could sit at a table next to a woman like Corinne Hadley Rainsford and tell her to put my quilt down with respect for both of us, and I failed. I didn't raise that man. That's on me as much as it is on you. But Beckett, you're 34. You don't get to be raised anymore. You have to do the rest yourself." He was quiet a long time. Then he said, "Tatum and I broke off the engagement on Monday." I said, "Oh." He said, "I told her what her mother said. I asked her if she'd laughed. She said she had. I asked her if she'd say it again. She said her mother was just being her mother. I asked her if she'd ever, in her life, told her mother to stop. She said no. I said, then we shouldn't get married. She agreed." I looked at my son. I thought, there he is. I thought, look at that. There he is. I said, "Beckett, I'm proud of you." He said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Can I have the quilt back? Not to keep. To borrow. I'd like to sleep with it on my bed. For a while. Just so I remember." I had brought it with me. Of course I had. It was in the trunk of my car, wrapped in the same tissue paper. I'd been carrying it around for 9 days because I didn't know what else to do with it. I went out to the car. I came back in. I put the box on the table between us. He didn't open it in the diner. He took it home. He texted me at 11 that night. The text said, "It's on my bed. Good night, Mom." That was 8 months ago. 1788 Beacon is now in renovation. 16 units, each one a real apartment with a real kitchen. The marble entryway is staying. The garden is staying. We're adding a children's room on the ground floor with a daycare license. The first families move in next April. The foundation is called the Hollis Marbury Foundation. We will, in time, own more buildings. Beckett is dating a kindergarten teacher named Sadie. She came to dinner at my house in September. She brought a peach pie she'd made herself. When I told her I used to be a chef, she got embarrassed about the pie, and I told her the pie was wonderful, and it was. She and Beckett have known each other since August. I'm not making any predictions. I'm just telling you what's true. Corinne Hadley Riensford resigned from her co-op board in December. I heard it from a woman at the post office who knows everyone. I don't know if it's connected. I'm not asking. I am not in the will of any other person. I do not need to be. I have enough. Sometimes people ask me when this story comes up. And it comes up. Because Boston is a small town and everybody knows somebody. They ask me if I regret it. The trust thing. Cutting my son out. I tell them the truth. I tell them I didn't cut my son out. I gave him the chance to become someone whose mother didn't need to leave him $40 million for him to be all right. Most boys never get that gift. Most boys spend their whole lives waiting for a number to land in their bank account that will tell them who they are. My son knows who he is now. He found out the hard way. He found out in a diner on a Wednesday night over meatloaf when his 68-year-old mother told him she had taken everything away, and he said after a long, quiet moment, "Okay, Mom, tell me how I help with 1788. That is a richer thing than money." The quilt is on his bed. I asked him last week. It's still there. He says he's not giving it back. I told him it was always his. I've been turning that night over in my mind for almost a year now, and the thing I keep coming back to is the 8 seconds. Not the dog blanket comment. Not the laugh. The 8 seconds my son sat staring at a salad fork while his mother stood next to him, holding a quilt she'd spent 11 months making, waiting for him to be the man we'd raised him to be. I used to blame Corinne for everything. It was easy to blame her. She made it easy. But the longer I sit with this, the more I understand that Corinne was just being Corinne. Cruel people are not the problem. Cruel people are weather. You don't ask why a thunderstorm is loud. You ask why your house wasn't built to stand up to one. Beckett wasn't built to stand up to one. Beckett wasn't built to stand up to one. That's the truth I had to face in Hollis Marbury's office that Sunday morning. I had given my son everything I thought a mother could give. Stability. Education. A father he adored for 20 years. A roof. A yard. A stop-and-shop job in high school, so he'd learn what an hour of work actually feels like. But I had never made him sit at a hard table and defend someone he loved. Not once. The world had been gentle to him because I had made it gentle. And gentleness, it turns out, doesn't build a spine. When I took 1788 Beacon away from him, people thought it was punishment. It wasn't. Punishment is what you do when you've given up. What I did was the opposite. I believed Beckett could become a man who didn't need a $40 million building to know his worth, and I gave him the only thing left I had to give. I gave him the chance to find out. The cause and the effect of this whole story sit very close together. Corinne mocked the quilt because she had spent a lifetime mocking things and never being told to stop. Tatum laughed because her mother had laughed in front of her for 29 years. Beckett froze because I had loved him too softly and too completely. And I walked out because somewhere underneath the grief, I finally understood that the kindest thing I could do for my son was to stop being the easy answer. There is a kind of strength that doesn't shout. It just decides. It sits down at a desk in a hotel room at 5:30 in the morning and writes 3 things on a piece of stationery, and then it goes and eats blueberry pancakes. That is the strength I want every woman watching this to know is inside her. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to be cruel. You just need to be clear about what you will and will not carry anymore. Beckett sleeps under that quilt now. He earned it back. Not with money. With 8 months of becoming somebody who would not have looked at the salad fork.